We've got on the line right now another very special guest. She's the U.S. representative from the great state of Wyoming. The one and only Congresswoman Harriet Hageman joins us again here on Breitbart News Saturday. Congresswoman, I really want to thank you for joining us here on Breitbart News Saturday.
Well, it's always wonderful to be with you, and I love the opportunity to talk to your listeners.
Yeah, so lots to talk about. I want to get your reaction first to this breaking news out of Israel, where Hamas terrorists have apparently infiltrated the country. They've been firing thousands of rockets into the country. Really, really horrible situation there. The Prime Minister, Bibi Netanyahu, says Israel is at war. Our Pentagon is backing them up on this. I don't know. What's your thoughts on this? And then then I want to talk to you about the speaker race.
My thoughts are that a weak America makes for a very dangerous world. We have the President of the United States, the leader of the free world, is clearly suffering from serious dementia. We know it. The world knows it. World leaders know it. So we've got that situation. We also have taken our eye off the ball in terms of addressing things that I think are actually of great significance to the United States, including protecting Israel against Iran. Under Obama, we sent Iran pallets of cash worth $40 billion, and then just in the last month, we sent them another $6 billion in exchange for a couple of hostages, and we released some of the more dangerous people in the entire world. So it is a disaster, but it is a man-made disaster, and I think it's in large part because of a lack of leadership, not only a lack of leadership from the United States, but I think that it reflects upon this administration's and the Obama administration's hostility to Israel and their refusal to recognize Iran for the terrorist organization that it is.
Yeah, really, really terrifying stuff over there. And I think you're 100% right that it's the Biden administration's fault and previously the Obama administration's fault. But okay, so Congresswoman, on Capitol Hill this week, it was a lot of news. Obviously, Speaker Kevin McCarthy has been ousted by a motion to vacate the chair. And you guys are currently mid-search for a new Speaker of the House. I know you've come out, and we did a big story on it the other day. You've come out and endorsed Jim Jordan, who's the chair of the Judiciary and Weaponization Committee for the speakership. Can you explain for us why you're backing Jim Jordan? Why do you want him to be the Speaker of the House? What is it about him that has earned your endorsement?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, yes, I have endorsed Jim Jordan, and I'm proud to do so. I do think that the other gentlemen, Steve Scalise and Kevin Hern, are both phenomenal men, and so I'm optimistic that we're going to get a very, very good speaker in place this next week. But as far as Jim Jordan goes, I have been working with him on both Weaponization Select Committee as well as the Judiciary Committees. He is absolutely a stalwart in staying on message and focusing on the issues that we need to focus on, which include exposing the incredible violation of our First Amendment rights that have been done by this administration and the various agencies in their effort to suppress conservatives from being able to engage on social media, the exposure of Merrick Garland for the hack that he is, the political hack that he is, the exposure along with the Oversight Committee with Jamie Comer and his group being able to expose the fact that the corruption of the Biden family, Joe Biden all the way down to Hunter Biden, and how they had a pay-for-play scheme while Joe Biden was vice president after he left office. And then I have serious questions as to what extent our national policy, international policy, and national security is being compromised because of Hunter Biden's and Joe Biden's brothers' activities on the world stage. What I will say is that Jim Jordan has been absolutely laser focused on all of those things, and every one of them relate to us being able to take our government back. They're not just isolated events where there's something associated with the Hunter Biden and the Biden family corruption, and that really doesn't bleed over into who Merrick Garland is or who Mayorkas is. All of these things are related, and they are destabilizing our country. And Jim Jordan's efforts and his willingness to go at these and make some very difficult statements, but make difficult decisions about bringing the right people in to question and interview, his willingness to go out there and fight this battle, regardless of what, say, the FBI or the Department of Justice are trying to cover up. He has been absolutely at the forefront of taking our country back because he's exposing what is going on in Washington, D.C. As the leader, as the Speaker of the House, that gives him even more of a megaphone to expose this. And if we expose it, we can correct it, and we can, again, retake the United States of America and the promise that it has given all of us in terms of our freedoms and liberties.
Right. Another reason why I think Jim Jordan, and I think you're right about this, that Jim Jordan's would be the right decision, is that you've got the person who you smoked in a primary to become the congresswoman from Wyoming, the one and only Liz Cheney, big never Trumper, total establishment loser. She came out and she's saying, well, if Jim Jordan gets the speakership, this would be terrifying, right? Well, I think if she is against Jim Jordan, I'm for Jim Jordan. So, I mean, what do you think about that, about her being out there and aggressively working against Jim Jordan getting the speakership?
I think that Liz Cheney needs to go away. I think it was clear throughout not only Wyoming, but the United States of America, that there's very little appetite for what Liz Cheney has to sell. She's mad at Jim Jordan for personal reasons. And it was laughable to me, this woman who doesn't understand things like the Fourth Amendment or the Fifth Amendment or the First Amendment, for goodness sakes, talking about that if Jim Jordan were elected as the Speaker of the House, there would no longer be any Republicans who would protect the Constitution of the United States of America. And it's such an absurd statement. It also just demonstrates the shallowness of her analytical reasoning. The Constitution protects us from government. Our ability to exercise our First Amendment rights, whether it is challenging election integrity or it is challenging the 2020 election or it is challenging Joe Biden's failures or it's talking about Joe Biden's dementia, she wants to suppress people from being able to discuss things that she finds uncomfortable or that she disagrees with. So to have someone like Liz Cheney actually lecture any of us on constitutional principles is rather laughable.
Yeah, so now, Congresswoman, can you explain for us, we're in unprecedented territory here. This has never happened before in the history of America. We've never had a speaker ousted like this we've never gone through this process. So what is going to happen next week? How does this work? Like, where do we go from here? I've seen stuff about like, okay, maybe Monday night there's going to be a meeting in the House Republican Conference. Tuesday there might be a candidate forum. Wednesday you guys might vote in conference, and then what? I don't understand what's going on here. Can you walk us through the process of the mechanics of this and how it works, and how do we get to a Speaker of the House, whether that's Jordan or one of these other guys or somebody else? I don't know. How do we get there eventually?
Well, I think you know as much as I do from what you just laid out. That's my understanding, is what you've just described. We're going to go in and hopefully as a family, we're going to work this out. We're going to be coming to a consensus that we'll get to the necessary votes, 214, 215, whatever the number is that we need. And we're going to walk out on the floor. We're going to have a vote. And within a short period of time, we're going to have a speaker put in place. That's my hope. That's my aspiration. I think that cooler heads need to prevail here. I think that Kevin McCarthy was a good speaker, but that's in the past. Now we have to move on. So let's look forward. Let's get somebody in place. We have already passed 4 appropriations bills that are sitting in the Senate. They fund about 70% of the government. If the Senate would take those up, we would be able to get by these ideas of having to do continuing resolutions and having to worry about the shutting down the government and all of that, because we would have funded so much of our government already. So I wish that the Senate would get back into session, actually do their job, vote on those 4 appropriations bills. If we have to go into conference, let's get a conference going. Let's work out the differences and let's get these funding mechanisms in place. That's the way that I see things, but I approach things from a very common sense and practical standpoint. We need to do that. We need to get the remainder of our appropriations bills done. My criticism of what's happened this last week relates to the fact that it has put us back about 2 weeks for being able to get our appropriations bills done. We were going to do 2 of them this past week. We would have done 2 more this coming week. That would have put us at 8 of the 12 appropriations bills well before the end of October, which should have given us sufficient time to work with the Senate. But people just kind of put the skids on, and then you got this situation with the motion to vacate. This isn't what the American people sent us to Washington, D.C. to do. They sent us to Washington, D.C. to solve problems, to address the overspending, to try to address the corruption in the Biden White House, to get more transparency, to make sure that we're protecting people's constitutional rights, and to right-size our government. Those are the things that they want us to do. Those are the things I want to do. I want to get back there. I want to get to work. I want to pass appropriations bills, and I want to start addressing the things that are important to the citizens of this country.
Right, and the reason why the appropriations fight is so important, and I agree with you 100% about this, is that it hasn't been since 1995 that we've passed the 12 appropriations bills out of Congress and they made it to the president's desk. That's decades and decades ago. We've been doing these omnibuses and continuing resolutions and whatnot. And by the way, if you split them up, what you're doing is you're dividing up the leverage, so that way. If they get the whole government funding in one bill, which is what the swamp wants, right? That's what Washington wants.
That's right.
If they get that, they get enormous leverage, and there's little change that happens. Maybe you get a rider here or a line there or whatever that changes this policy or that policy, but not the level of policy change that you can get if you split them up into multiple different bills. I don't know if we'll get to all 12 at the end of this time. But if we're able to break this up into 4, 5, 6, 7 pieces of legislation funding the government, then we're taking the leverage away from the swamp and giving it to the regular people. And that's going to help create a new precedent for moving forward, so that each time we're going to have the opportunity to get better and better policy each go around every time the government funding question comes up again.
You're absolutely correct. And are you going to run for Congress? We need you.
Maybe one day.
We need people. We need people like you who actually have the common sense and understand how these things are interconnected. The failures of Washington, D.C. are not a bug of the system, or what we would describe as the failures of Washington, D.C. They're not a bug, they're a feature. If they fail to do the appropriations bills, we get a $1.8 trillion omnibus like we did last December. What that did is that completely disenfranchised the 118th Congress to make decisions about budgeting and how we're going to prioritize spending. It had massive amounts of money in there for Ukraine. They're already running out of that. We got no accountability in terms of how the money is being spent in Ukraine, what our ultimate mission is, when we're going to know by what metric we can measure whether we're winning or losing. In other words, failure and lack of accountability is to be celebrated by folks in Washington, D.C. I want to bring accountability to Washington, D.C. I'm perfectly comfortable being held accountable for the decisions I make. And I can tell you that some of my constituents don't like some of the ways that I vote. Others do. That's what a representative republic is. That's what a constitutional republic is. There's going to be some things that people will agree with and they disagree with. But ultimately, I think the vast majority of people in this country believe the federal government is too powerful, too big, too dysfunctional, and it is destroying the American dream. You can look at inflation. You can look at the price of gasoline. You can look at what it's going to take to heat our homes. You can look at what it's going to take to run our hospitals. You can look at what's happening in our schools. Again, I will use the word. All of these things are interconnected because they are a level of failure when you put big government in charge and you put people like Joe Biden at the top of the ticket, and then you have people like Mayorkas, Christopher Wray, Mary Garland. You give these people power, and because their entire history has been to fail upwards, then when you give them that kind of power, they fail even more gloriously, which is what we're dealing with right now, and I'm watching it on live TV.
Yeah, and Congresswoman, the last thing I would ask you here is that, okay, I know the House floor can't really do anything. You guys can't do anything across the House floor until you get the Speaker situation figured out. But I do believe the committees are still in place, right? Because the rules package is there. So it's not like January when, we had to wait a week because until we had a speaker, then we could get a rules package, then we could get all the committee assignments done. So in other words, you guys are still doing stuff via the weaponization committee. The impeachment inquiry is continuing, right? Like, so the committees are still working. If am I wrong about that? And what are some things that you guys have going on those fronts right now?
Well, I can tell you that the committee still exists, but at least
Mm-hmm.
for a couple of days, it was kind of a period for people to get back to their districts, go back and visit with their constituents, regroup so that we can deal with what we need to this coming week with the speaker. So I don't know how much committee work is being done. I can tell you from the standpoint of
Mm-hmm.
my committees, we're not meeting this week, this past week. We had some, but this next week, we will hopefully be able to resume that. It is critically important that we go forward with these impeachment inquiries. You probably saw that Mr. Chan refused to show up after being subpoenaed to the Judiciary Committee, so we now have to determine what to do with him. He was the guy who ran the censorship operation, the industrial censorship operation for the White House over the last couple of years, basically violating the First Amendment rights of millions of people throughout the entire United States. So we do need to continue with our committee work. We will get back on track with that again. As I said, this has been a setback. It's a temporary one. We need to get back to work. We all need to get to be adults in the room, and we need to get a speaker in place because this just what we found out in the last 2 days about the DOJ. The DOJ in one of their documents, internal documents, knew that Joe Biden was the big guy. They knew. They described him. They referred to the big guy and said, Joe Biden is the big guy. So we have a situation where the Department of Justice over the last 3 years has been doing everything they can to cover up the corruption of Joe Biden, even to the point of recognizing he was engaged in corrupt activities with his son around the world and covering it up and trying to act like, well, nobody knew who the big guy was. Nobody knows who the big guy is. Nobody knows that. The DOJ has internal documents demonstrating that they knew that the big guy was Joe Biden. This is stuff that the American people needs to know because we cannot allow this level of corruption to continue to basically infect our entire government because eventually it will collapse.
Yeah, really important stuff there. I couldn't agree more with everything you're saying there. Congresswoman Harriet Hageman from the great state of Wyoming. Congresswoman, where can people go to learn more about you, get involved if they so choose?
Sure, they can go to Hageman for Wyoming, which is my campaign. That's my campaign website, and then they can go to my official website with the House. I think it's house.gov, but they can go to either one of those places. They can go to my YouTube channel. That's where you can see the various places where I have interviewed and questioned various administration officials. But I'd love to have interaction with the folks. And again, thank you for the opportunity to visit with you about these incredibly important issues.